Hello, my name is Xander. You may know me as, Video Gamer Boy or Gamer Boy, as I usually dub myself in a lot of my videos, specifically my latest Let's Play videos. I guess I'd say latest because I haven't done too many of them lately because my schedule's kind of full sometimes, that and I'm lazy. I have, said this kind of same thing in a few of my videos, so sorry if you've heard this already and you're like, we get it, but I just wanted to get my point across. This is basically a face reveal, because I've never shown my face on this channel ever, and it's obviously for privacy reasons, but I feel like, I'm almost an adult. I don't think, the world is full of hackers who, digitally scan people's faces and, look into their lives for fun. I don't think the world is like that. At least I hope not. So this is basically a face reveal video, but also, a video about the subject I'm about to talk about. But this whole, showing my face thing is also part of the video itself, because I'll be honest with you, it was a fucking nightmare to edit the first version of the video you're about to see in the first place. It was very hard to edit it because it was mostly voice dub, because a lot of my videos I just do my voice against the background. It was a lot easier to do this for my Uncharted movie review, because it was literally just one background and an audio track that I recorded of myself, and I had a little script, if I'm gonna be honest. That was a lot easier. Editing multiple clips, images, working around that. There's some times where I had the audio clips, recordings around the footage, and then sometimes I had the footage around the audio. It was very irritating that I kept doing that to myself, so I thought a great workaround would be to use a lot of that footage and those clips, but also intersperse with, footage of myself talking a lot about what I'm about to talk about. That way I can just have unaltered footage of me saying what I need to say without having to work around specific clips that I need to edit. So let's do this, man. I love Batman. Ever since God knows when, Batman has pretty much been my favorite superhero next to Spider-Man. Ever since his first appearance all the way to modern times, I've watched, read, and listened to the character since 1966, 1989, and all the way up then. Seeing how Matt Reeves' The Batman is coming out soon enough, well, it'll probably be out by then, I decided to make a video talking about my favorite superhero, aside from doing Let's Plays for the Arkham games. But I really just wanted to talk about the character in another space, so I thought of letting someone else speak for me a little bit.
I love Batman. I love Batman too much. I love Batman so much that it's definitely an unhealthy obsession. but I haven't really explained why I find the character of Bruce Wayne so fascinating. Batman stories, to me, are the ultimate tale of turning pain and suffering into something positive. That is a story that everyone can relate to because, let's be honest here, the world can suck. My parents were never gunned down in an alley. I never fell into a well of bats. But I've experienced and probably will always experience feelings of fear, of depression, of anger, of angst. It's in my nature as a human being to experience those things. It's in all our nature. It is what we choose to do with that pain that we all feel that defines us. Batman chose to turn all those negative emotions he feels into a symbol that can bring people hope. Hope that Batman will save us from pain. But more importantly, hope that we can all be Batman.
So because the idea of Batman has already been talked about many times on YouTube channels such as High Top Films, I decided instead of doing a tribute to Batman in that sense, I'm going to do it in a very simple way by doing a top 10 or an ultimate top 10, specifically covering comics and movies, which are my favorite forms of media to consume Batman. So what we'll do is that first I will cover my 10 favorite Batman comics in my collection, and this will be my top favorites. So if there's something you might really like that isn't on the list, then I do apologize. You can let me know in the comments what your favorite one is if it isn't on the list. And that'll also apply to movies. And because I'm not like a master at editing, for the movie parts, I'm not going to include a bunch of clips from all the movies I'm talking about. I'll have probably screenshots here and there, both for time purposes. I'm not a master editor, but also copyright purposes, because I'd imagine some aspects of these movies and other forms of bat media are copyrighted to an extent. So I'll try my best to avoid that while also getting my points across. And kind of like I said in the beginning, there's going to be a number of videos of myself talking about each comic and movie in between, just to get everything done, everything made clear for your viewing pleasure, I guess so, but also for my time. It's hard making videos, I guess.
Number one is the Batman Chronicles, or specifically a compilation of all of the Batman comics leading from, I think, 1939 all the way to somewhere in the early 40s. And this is like the OG Batman. This is where it all started. And it's definitely a great place to go to when you want to see where all the roots took place. This was, of course, written by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, but thanks to many people who've brought it up and all that, and now it's to my attention that Bill Finger kind of made a lot of the things that made Batman Batman. And it's not the greatest thing to dig up the past and shun a now dead man, but it's not a great thing that Bob Kane basically Mark Zuckerberg Bill. But there's more attention brought to it now, thankfully. There's even I think a Hulu documentary called Batman and Bill. I believe that's what the title is. But yeah, I think I'm going to say it was the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix. That was kind of the first time Bill Finger was given more credit in the credits somewhere, because in every Batman movie there's something that mentions all the original characters were created by Bob Kane. I think that Joker is the first one to actually mention Bill. Though I could be wrong, maybe there's some other ones that have now mentioned Bill Finger. Let me know in the comments then if I'm right if Joker's the only one who's done that yet so far. But yeah.
This was back in the day when, Batman brandished a gun and he, threw people off buildings and actually killed them. It was definitely quite a time. Savage. They also introduced Robin and even the Joker in such a early time, which just makes these characters more iconic. And of course, like Batman, Joker also was actually able to kill until the 50s, obviously. The Joker even died a few issues or so after his first appearance, which is not too surprising now, but he did eventually come back, only to sort of disappear in the 60s, but eventually came back well and good in the 70s.
So overall, this is, very classic. It's a great way to start with the character if you really want to go back to his roots. Obviously, I put it so low on the list because, well, it's just not my ultimate favorite, but I respect it so much that I just have to put it even low on the list just to give it a good mention and really cement how classic and good this was. It's not bad. Next is The Man Who Laughs from I think 2005, made by Ed Brubaker, Doug Monkey, Patrick Zerker, and Aaron Sod. Sorry if I butchered those names. This is like I said, from 2005, and it's basically a reimagining on how Batman and Joker first met. I already mentioned, the 1949 comics where, he and Batman and Joker met. So this is sort of that all over again, except it's sort of semi-connected to Batman Year One by Frank Miller. To an extent, at least in my own headcanon, it sort of is, based on the little Easter egg at the end of Year One. And as a fun fact, the title is actually a reference to The Man Who Laughs, which was a old black and white movie from the 1920s, and actually has its like villain that looks like the Joker. And I think either Bill Finger or Bob Kane were inspired by that movie, because if you want a Joker movie that isn't, Joaquin Phoenix's movie, then I'd recommend that. I don't know where you find it. Maybe you can look it up, but I have no clue where to find it. Maybe it's on DVD or on Amazon. But I'd definitely recommend it, even just for the creepy imagery of like a black and white Joker before Joker.
The Joker basically hijacks a TV station and starts terrorizing Gotham, making threats and all of that. He first, threatens a bunch of rich people, specifically 3 of them, and threatens to infect them with Joker toxin. And it's kind of similar to the Laughing Fish episode in the animated series, with Bruce Wayne not even being safe as he's infected with the Joker toxin, but saved at the last minute because he's Batman. I think it's, pretty decent story with some good art and something you might not mind.
Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth from 1989 is definitely a strange one. This one was written by Grant Morrison, and the art is done by Dave McKean, and like I said, it's a weird one.
Where Joker takes over Arkham Asylum and Batman has to deal with him and also save the hostages within. It is very much like the video game Arkham Asylum, and no surprise, the game was inspired by the story beats of the comic, with some exceptions here and there. I will definitely give praise to Dave McKean's art, and he is known for doing the Sandman comics. And I really kind of enjoy Joker's design. It's weird and interesting.
I'd say Joker's design is interesting, like I just said. He's got like wavy hair, he's got green fingernails that are, I think, fake. Though I doubt the people at Arkham would give him green nail polish, so I'm assuming that's more of a stylistic thing, giving him green fingernails and wavy hair. He's This is actually the first time I think where Joker had more of a queer codedness to his character, because it's specifically mentioned by Graham Morrison that he intentionally wrote Joker as overtly gay, and apparently the big heads at Warner, no, not Warner Brothers, sort of DC were like, hey, can you tone that down a bit, just so people don't notice completely, because obviously Tim Burton's Batman was coming out the same year, and they didn't want the comic to ruin Jack Nicholson's image, I guess. So yeah, they toned it down to where I guess people wouldn't notice if they didn't think about it too much, but I definitely noticed. I don't know how much of this, was in the first ever publication. There could have been some stuff that was cut out that was put back in with the art, because there's just one bit I cannot interpret as anything else. Like, early on, when Batman goes to the asylum and meets with Joker, Batman's being his usual self, and Joker's like, "Oh, don't be a hard ass," and he literally grabs a handful of Batman's bat muffins, and Batman has the proper response to absolutely anyone who does that, honestly, but it happens to be the Joker, so it doesn't help, and Batman just says, "Get your filthy hands off of me." And just, yeah, I guess according to like editor's notes from Morrison himself, there's like a hidden theme throughout this book where Batman was really uncomfortable with a lot of things, especially being touched. Because there's also a scene later on where he meets up with Clayface in one of the corridors of the asylum, and Clayface is just really fucked up with disease and shit. And I think that in itself was meant to be a reference to, I guess, meant to be a reference to AIDS and all these diseases that were coming up and the fear of disease. So that Clayface is meant to represent that as well as Batman, because Clayface is trying to touch Batman. He's like, "Let me share my disease with you," which is not really subtle, but I'll let it slide. And Batman just can't take it. He ducks, and then his arm is kind of burnt by Clayface's like toxic clay, and then Batman kicks him down the stairs, like breaking his legs. No. He kicks him down the stairs and then breaks his legs himself. Because Batman is kind of a little bonkers as he's going through the asylum because of this hide and go seek game that Joker has in play for an hour. And it's kind of making him think about himself, make him question things a bit. It's kind of crazy. He meets a bunch of villains, like Maxie Zeus of all people, the Mad Hatter.
The story also follows Amadeus Arkham, who is the founder of the asylum, and we basically get his story from being a little boy to an adult, having his family, and eventually losing that family to one of his patients, and eventually taking his own life. The story overall has a theme of madness and a look at Batman's own sort of madness and the sort of mental torture that the character goes through. The 30th anniversary edition also comes with the script for the comic, which is really nice to read, as it has some editor's notes. And it also has some really good art that you might appreciate if you're into that sort of thing.
Number 7 is Batman Earth 1 by Gary Frank and Jeff Jones, and is essentially a retelling of a classic Batman stories, sort of in the vein of the Ultimate Marvel Universe, where they started off fresh with a bunch of DC characters and went on to some success, but still keeping on with the classic versions of the characters.
While trying to take a few different approaches, Earth 1 still keeps true to many of the classic features in Batman stories, such as Bruce Wayne's classic origin and the character overall, while being, as the back of the book describes, just a man, fallible, vulnerable, and angry. It and many other Batman stories really showcasing just how someone like him deals with the torment and pain of losing someone that he cares so deeply about. We also have Alfred, who picks up more of a fatherly mentor sort of role, more than in most iterations of the character, which can be really nice and make you feel for the dynamic between him and Bruce, while also making him more badass and experienced. And you have the Penguin, who is his classic fancy businessman type self, while also on the side having shady dealings and not being a really nice guy, but Batman doesn't seem to care. Also, apparently Matt Reeves' The Batman is inspired at least a bit by Earth 1, and that can be sort of seen with how one of the villains of the film is the Penguin, who is played by Colin Farrell. But aside from that, there's not too much else in the movie from what we can see that is in the comic as well, aside from the Riddler being in the second volume.
Number 6 is On Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and this is yet another quintessential book in terms of Batman comics, according to most fans, and including myself for a little bit. This has inspired many Batman media, like The Dark Knight. But according to this little quote here by Christopher Nolan, though the quote kind of mentions he's the director of The Dark Knight Rises instead of The Dark Knight, which actually has a bit of imagery and story details that come up, like Two-Face and his involvement with police and Batman. But nonetheless, this is influential to a lot of Batman stories like Year One and some others. It also had its own animated movie adaptation, the parts 1 and 2 of Long Halloween, and it wasn't so bad, actually. So let's get into the plot. A serial killer known as the Holiday Killer strikes fear in Gotham by killing people on specific holidays, and Batman and the police are trying to figure out who it might be, while also stopping several of Batman's greatest villains along the way. It is a really thick book, and it has a lot to cover. It's broken up in chapters, and each chapter is mostly based around a holiday, except for chapter 1, which is sort of a prologue, I guess you could say. Seeing how chapter 1 doesn't cover a specific holiday. But pretty much every holiday you can think of is covered in this book. You've got the classic ones: Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, New Year's, then there's April Fool's Day, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. I think that's almost all of them. I don't think Groundhog Day is covered in this. Yeah, probably not. Last I checked. But it is definitely a quintessential, story to read on almost any holiday, though I guess the title suggests that it's a Halloween themed story, though I guess you could say that Arkham Asylum is probably more Halloween themed in terms of true creepy horror in that sense. But there's actually a couple of other Batman stories that would definitely be recommended for a Halloween read.
Julian Day or the Calendar Man would be their top suspect, but sadly he is already locked up in Arkham Asylum, so they basically need to think out of the box to figure out who could be enacting these sick killings. As stated before, the comic also follows many of Batman's villains, such as the Joker, Poison Ivy, Solomon Grundy, Scarecrow, and even Catwoman. Carmine Falcone and his gang also play a prominent role, as they and the rival gang are incorporated into this whole bloody affair with the Holiday Killer.
Basically, I won't spoil most of the story at all. This is something you guys need to read on your own, because, well, it would be so great if I ruined the ending for you. And it is kind of complicated to actually explain anyway, because I don't really write scripts, and I haven't read this in quite a while. So just take my word for it that this is definitely an essential read. Number 5 is Batman the World, and I wouldn't mention, the writer and the artist, but there are so many of them, and this is because this is an anthology book with more of a special theme to it. If you couldn't guess by the title, this is a special anthology Batman book about Batman basically crime fighting across the globe. There are 14 stories based around 14 separate countries, from America, which is small, obvious step, all the way down to Japan. Honestly, too obvious, places to start and end. But in all honesty, this is a pretty good comic for what it is, and I definitely recommend it just for my starting words. It's also decently priced, $25, especially for a hard copy. The hardcover version is pretty much the only version that's out, which I think is nice. The hardcover sort of cements, the quality, cements how special it is, and kind of how special it is to me right now. The 14 main stories are
The United States, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, the Czech Republic, Russia, Turkey, Poland, Mexico, Brazil, South Korea, China, and Japan.
And in all honesty, pretty much all 14 stories are of decent quality, or at least a number of them are decent, while many others are good. There's no real bad apple in the bunch, thankfully, which is really nice, I'll say. I guess seeing how we're already on a list of favorites, I mentioned my favorite story in this anthology, that being the one set in Brazil, Where Are the Heroes, written by Carlos Estefan, art and cover by Pedro Mauro, and the colors being done by Fabi Marquez. Hopefully I did the pronunciation right enough. And I think to sort of cap this section off, I'll read a quote from Batman himself talking about real heroes, as he himself admits that not all heroes wear capes, and sometimes he won't be there to help people. Sometimes we need to depend on the small heroes out there. In the end, no caped gods are coming to save these people. Their true heroes are those who struggle to provide conditions and opportunities for those who do not have them. In the end, no caped gods are coming to save these people. Their true heroes are those who struggle to provide conditions and opportunities for those who do not have them. Heroes that often are invisible, ordinary people giving their lives to make things better, to clean this damn stench. They can make the real change, and maybe one day we can all breathe fresh air again. In the meantime, I'll keep my watch. Next is Gotham by Gaslight by Brian Augustin and Mike Mignola, or Michael Mignola as he's listed there, I guess to be more dignified. This is a Elseworld story, one of many that have been published, which is basically an alternate universe story, kind of like a one-shot usually. And this is, of course, a sort of what if Batman was around in the 19th century. The main plot is based around the Jack the Ripper killings, which kind of makes this an alternate universe in itself, seeing how Jack the Ripper attacked London and not Gotham City, which would be in America, and obviously America is quite a way away from Britain. But I digress. It is an interesting tale, and it has definitely fascinated lots of people. There's plenty of fan art and fan stories based around the idea of, Batman from an alternate time period. There's actually a YouTube channel called The Bat Feed that has a whole series, talking about an unofficial documentary style photo book that's being made based around the idea of Batman from, I think it's the 1910s. I think it's 1919 all the way to 1929 or something like that. I really wish I could remember it, but I'll probably put some text somewhere in editing to let you know how it actually is. But the videos are also in a documentary style and are really well done and just make you really fascinated about an alternate timeline version of Batman. And this is a great start for that if you're interested in alternate timeline history versions of certain franchises.
The central plot is very basic, with Batman trying to find and take down Jack the Ripper, who has happened to strike Gotham with fear and his affinity for killing prostitutes. Later on, Bruce Wayne is framed for the murders and needs to get out and figure out who is the real Jack the Ripper. I obviously won't spoil who is the real Jack the Ripper or how the rest of the story goes in general, but I will say you should read it.
So yeah, aside from that, there's not much to talk about this. It is a short comic, so that kind of makes sense, and I have not much to say. Even then, there's actually a second story included in this. I should have mentioned that with my Man Who Laughs bit a while earlier. That also has a second story within it that's more of a bonus feature for the comic and less of a prominent thing, so that's why I didn't talk about it much. But it is a different artist and kind of a different story, but I guess vaguely connected, just like Man Who Laughs. But yeah, that's all I have to say. I would recommend this if you're into steampunk sort of stuff, though there isn't much steampunk technology in this book. But in the animated film based on this, there is a bit of that in terms of the bat cycle sort of being close to that, and also the grappling hook, obviously, because grappling hooks are probably hard to make now, let alone in the 19th century. Next, number 3 is a classic, The Killing Joke, by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. If you really, want to talk about a classic Batman story, I mean, I've talked about them already, but this is definitely another quintessential classic that pretty much every, Batman comics video will mention, at least, the quality ones.
The story starts with Batman going to Arkham Asylum to visit the Joker, simply to talk to him about the future of their dynamic, essentially, whether either of them will kill the other. But this is interrupted by the fact that Joker has clearly escaped and left a fake with him. At this point, everyone knows where the story goes, even if you haven't read the book, as the Joker visits Barbara Gordon's house and shoots her in the spine, paralyzing her from the waist down, which became one of the most infamous moments in comic history, changing the tide of the character. Later on, they kidnap Commissioner Gordon, strip him down, and lead him on to face the Joker, who later takes him through a tunnel in a carnival ride, setting up this sort of TV screen, eventually showing him naked pictures of his daughter in anguish, just to drive him mad, as the whole point of his nefarious scheme. Batman eventually catches up with them and faces off against the Joker until he is given the slip, and Joker eventually gets away into the funhouse. Batman consoles Gordon, and surprisingly Gordon is alright to an extent, and tells him to bring in him by the book, and only by the book. Batman, of course, catches up with the Joker and proves to him that Gordon is sane and well. Later, they go outside, and Joker almost has Batman, only to be stopped by his own gimmicks. Batman then continues the conversation he tried to have with Joker before, saying he could rehabilitate him, but Joker doesn't really care, and proceeds to tell a joke supposedly related to the situation, and starts laughing, as usual. But what's unusual is that Batman starts laughing with the Joker, so much that he grabs onto his shoulders, laughing so much with him in the night.
The final few panels of this story have been debated to this day by fans, debating whether or not Batman killed the Joker at the end. I say this briefly, obviously, because it's probably not the case. Batman most likely didn't kill Joker, and like I said in my voiceover earlier, he was most likely just holding on to Joker's shoulders, laughing alongside him, especially because it would just undo what Gordon already told him to do, bring him in by the book, which would make no sense if Batman just simply killed him moments later. But I appreciate the open-ended nature that some readers suggest. I don't remember what Alan Moore's interpretation of that is, but I'm pretty sure even he thinks that Batman didn't kill him. But Alan Moore is kind of an interesting individual, let's say, so he might have a different opinion. Plus, he's not the artist of this, so maybe he really did have a different interpretation of his own story. But I would definitely recommend The Killing Joke as an essential Batman read, along with a few of my other picks. For number 2, we have a double hitter with Batman: The Court of Owls from 2012 by Scott Snyder and Greg Puglio, and is, of course, a two-parter, basically, or at least it was released in 2 volumes when I bought it, but it is like one big story separated. I got this in the I think it was just simply the New 52 collection or whatever, featuring these two and then Death of the Family. But obviously that's not entirely connected to these, so that doesn't really count. But it is also a good one.
While solving a strange, peculiar case, Batman soon discovers that it involves both him and many others, with him as Bruce Wayne being threatened, and soon that threat becomes true as he is nearly killed by a mysterious assassin at the top of Wayne Tower. While investigating, Batman discovers a secret room within Wayne Tower built by his grandfather that includes several different items and mementos, all related to the Court of Owls, before the tower blows up, with Batman nearly escaping and a watchful figure in the distance. Later, Bruce looks for a lead somewhere in the sewers when he is later ambushed by one of the mysterious assassins who are somehow tied to this mysterious cult. Batman then wakes up in a maze clearly set up by the Court of Owls without his utility belt and tries to find a way out while also trying not to break mentally. Getting further through the maze and also receiving some jeers from a well-hungry crowd, Batman eventually fights back against the Talon and escapes into the sewers with his life, and later being found and brought back with some jumper cables and eventually getting back to work. Meanwhile, the Court of Owls decides to resurrect even more members and eventually leads them on to attack Bruce Wayne head-on and even the rest of Gotham to slowly and surely take control. Not too much later, the Talons storm Wayne Manor and attack Bruce head-on, but of course it is no real easy feat, and Bruce gets for at least a few of them before he and Alfred go underground, with Bruce then putting on a mech suit to take care of the remaining Talons, showing them who the real man of the house is. Alfred is calling all of the Bat family members and asking for their assistance in this whole event, with almost all of them being seen helping Batman out and kicking some serious ass. Like the other stories, I'd prefer not spoiling it for you guys and highly recommend you go check out the Court of Owls series.
Number 1 is Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Muccielli. And of course, this is the granddaddy of Batman stories, next to The Dark Knight Returns, next to The Killing Joke, next to so many of them. But this is definitely a true classic from a historical and just, overall story aspect. It's a fine book that came out in 1984, I believe. I haven't mentioned dates as much for some of these. Sorry if I've done that. But this is definitely an important book, as it came out around the same time as Watchmen, around the same time as I think some of the more popular Daredevil comics that really shaped what comics could be and really saved the industry. So that's why this, Watchmen, and a number of other comics are so important in this year, 1984. Though I could be wrong. I think it might say 1985. It's usually the cover. Yep. 1986. Okay. I'll put that at the beginning when I say the year, just to correct myself, so I don't get comments about that. But yes, 1986, important year for comics.
Like Earth One, Year One takes the task of retooling the classic Batman story well know and love, and making it more mature, more nuanced, and more human, and showing more of Bruce Wayne's process as he narrates most of the story, along with other characters, and we really get to see how he works. One of the other key focal points of the story is Jim Gordon, as he is treated like a second main character, dealing with the crime and corruption of Gotham, having no real way of stopping it just by the book. We also see that a possible love affair is brewing, even though Jim doesn't clearly want that, having a pregnant wife. On top of that, trying to figure out whether or not the Batman is truly a symbol for good or not. As you'd expect, Batman does show that he is more of a symbol for good, as he tries to take down the corrupt and the truly evil throughout the story. We also see Selina Kyle as a working girl who is fed up with all the crime in the city and decides to take down Carmine Falcone herself, but is in over her head, but gets help from Batman. Sometime later, Falcone sends his own men to kidnap Gordon's baby, and after a chase and after the baby almost falls, Bruce saves the baby and hands it to Gordon. Not having his glasses on, he assumes it's Batman but cannot see his face, and thanks him and lets him leave on his way. We also see one of the corrupt cops testify against the corrupt Commissioner Loeb, and Loeb resigns in the end. We finally end with Gordon now trusting Batman and seeing him as a valuable asset, and also teasing a familiar face that might show up soon enough.
All in all, this is a really good and really classic Batman story that I recommend you all read if you're really wanting to be introduced to the character, if you haven't read comics at all. This is a great way to start. We now move on to my top 10 favorite Batman movies, and like before, these are my personal favorites, so I sort of apologize if your favorite one isn't included in this list, and you can also let me know in the comments what your favorite Batman movie is. Though this will be a little different, as I'm not going to have a bunch of clips of the movie like I did, the comic panels for the comic half of the video. It's going to be like still images and my voice, because it is a little annoying to edit around clips more than still images, so I do apologize.
Follows the continuity of the main Batman animated series, as well as its sort of sequel spin-off, The New Batman Adventures, as this new Batwoman starts popping up in Gotham, and Batman is trying to figure out who she is and if she's really a force for good. Number 10 is Mystery of the Batwoman, which is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine, which is why it's on this list. The title implies there's a lot of mystery to it, so I won't spoil a lot of it if you actually are interested in checking it out. Like I said, it's a guilty pleasure in my opinion, and the most memorable thing about the movie is definitely the song by Sherry, I think that was her name, who does an original song for the film, which is something you don't expect from a Batman movie at all. Number 9 is Tim Burton's Batman from 1989, and of course this is another classic one that I would definitely put on the list. It is the quintessential Batman film and helped make Batman a household name and a more dignified character than he ever was for a while. Not to really knock down Adam West and the 60s Batman series, but this was a good movie. But obviously, I like the 1939 comics. I put it low on the list because it's not my absolute favorite in retrospect. Yes, part of that might be because Batman kills, like in the 39 comics. He also does that in Batman Returns. But it's mainly more because it's classic. It's a great way to start nonetheless, and I just need to give it a spot out of respect. Number 8 is Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. And instead of following Bruce Wayne, we follow Terry McGinnis, who is the new Batman of Neo Gotham. This one takes place multiple decades after the mainline animated series, with Bruce Wayne being an old man watching over this new Batman who takes on the Joker, who turns out to be the original Joker, somehow back from the dead. There's a lot of layers to the story as we get to find out what happened after the animated series and after the new Batman adventures, sort of teasing along the way what sort of began causing Batman to lose himself and decide to quit. Even though this film is now 20 years old, I definitely won't spoil it, but I will say that one scene in it is definitely one of the most famous scenes in a Batman movie, especially for a flashback. Go check it out. Number 7 is Under the Red Hood, and this is yet another classic in my opinion. To an extent, it's sort of an underrated classic to some, though enough people know about it. This is based on a comic of the same name, though some details are slightly different, but enough of the plot is the same. A mysterious figure known as the Red Hood is, hunting down many big criminals in Gotham, but of course using unconventional methods, especially unconventional to Batman. Batman tries to stop him and also find out who he is. Like many Batman films, there's a mystery to the whole thing, and I will not spoil it, even if it is an older movie and most people know the twist. Number 6 is The Dark Knight, and like a few others, I just had to put it on this list. It is yet another classic, and like Tim Burton's Batman, this helped redefine the character, really, bring him back to public attention. Obviously, Batman is not an obscure character in any sense of the word, of course not. I'd argue Superman deserves a little more recognition, even if in some ways he can be overpowered. But this and Tim Burton's Batman just really reinvented the character, though Batman Begins arguably did more of that because Batman and Robin came out years before Batman Begins and almost, kind of killed the chance of a Batman movie happening again. Of course, the most famous part of this movie is Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, which I agree is one of the most, fantastic movie performances and Joker performances. Next to Nicholson and Mark Hamill, Ledger is just phenomenal, and I definitely miss him. He was also great in movies like The Knight's Tale and 10 Things I Hate About You. So obviously, check out The Dark Knight if you haven't seen it, and those 2 other movies I just mentioned. Number 5 is Batman vs. Dracula. This is a spin-off movie of the 2004 TV series The Batman from WB, and this is definitely, a childhood classic of mine, which is why it's number 5 and not number 6, in case you're wondering. Just saying. This is such a memorable film to me, as I remember seeing it. I remember really enjoying it for what it was, and revisiting on HBO Max. It's surprisingly still a good movie. It's a direct-to-DVD film, of course, and it still holds up. Basically, as the title suggests, Batman literally fights against Dracula, but obviously he doesn't know, what's going on with vampires and stuff until very much later on. And surprisingly, the film is pretty dark for something that's meant for kids, as there's actually blood in the movie to a degree, because obviously they probably still needed the film to be for kids, though I think in most versions of the film it's still not rated or NR, as you might see on some DVD boxes. But I think the HBO Max version says TV PG. Nonetheless, it doesn't mess around with some of its scares, and I'd recommend it as a Halloween classic if you really want to look at something Batman related that's spooky other than Arkham Asylum. Number 4 is The Long Halloween Parts 1 and 2, and like I mentioned in my comic version part of the early video, I explained that there's 2 movies based on The Long Halloween that I watched recently, and I thought, in all honesty, this was a good adaptation. But I guess it's not too hard to mess up, though there have been some exceptions, I'd say, you might know of. This was well done, and I guess in a common theme with a lot of these adaptations, there's one particular change that kind of makes no sense, but they did it to change things up a bit, which is the twist ending, which obviously I won't spoil, just like I didn't spoil the original comic, so I'd recommend you check out the 2 movies if you ever get the chance. Number 3 is Batman Year One, another adaptation, obviously, seeing how I've already covered the comic. I just wanted to put both this and Long Halloween on the movie list because I kind of ran out of ideas, but they are good movies on their own if you haven't read the comics. This one is decently well done. I actually saw this movie when it was on Netflix because there's a lot of movies that used to be on Netflix when I was younger before I ever read the comic, and I enjoyed it fine. This is also a good, way to start, enjoying Batman if you don't read comics. So, like Long Halloween, I'd recommend you check this one out wherever you can find it. Number 2 is Gotham Knight, not to be confused with the upcoming video game Gotham Knights by WB Games. This is one of my favorite Batman movies. It's not number 1 for a reason, but I still felt I should put it on one of the top spots and really recommend it. Really talk about it, really recommend it to you guys. This is an anthology film, a little bit, like Batman the World, where I also covered an anthology on these 2 different lists. This one is arguably more connected in terms of, the stories, while also being an anthology. It's more grounded, obviously, because Batman's just doing his usual stuff in Gotham, but it's done so well. The animation styles are a little different between each segment, but each segment is really great and really masterful. It's a direct-to-DVD film, but it's easy to find, and I would highly recommend it. I won't really go into detail on many of the stories, but I'll just say watch it and enjoy it. Number 1 is Mask of the Phantasm. This is definitely the quintessential Batman film. When you want to talk about a real Batman film, it's not live action, it's not a TV show. Well, in this case it sort of is. This is the true Batman story that you should start out with, or at least, start out after the first try. This is one of my favorite Batman films next to Gotham Knight, and it's many other people's Batman film. I wouldn't say it's underrated like some might think. It's just not talked about as much as, Tim Burton's Batman or The Dark Knight. But this is something you need to see if you are a Batman fan and you haven't seen this film yet. Like many Batman stories, it's a mystery. a new, mysterious threat is coming to Gotham known as the Phantasm, who's of course killing, mob members, unlike Batman, but the press and the police even think it's Batman just based on the Phantasm's shadow and the way they move. So Batman not only has to avoid people who are after him, but he also has to solve the mystery on who the Phantasm is, and I guess unmask them. The Joker also shows up, and he's one of the other highlights of the movie, being played by Mark Hamill, just like in the animated series. Of course, this is all sort of a sequel or somewhere in between the animated series. Same animation team and crew, voice cast and all. It's definitely an amazing, film to watch if you are really into the animated series, or if you just love Batman in general. I definitely say go check it out at all costs. Holy shit, that was quite a lot to cover. This video is now hitting an hour, which is something I've never done with any of my videos, but I guess that makes it really special, which it is. I hope you really enjoyed this, despite some of the, production value quirks. And I hope you all enjoyed Robert Pattinson / Matt Reeves' The Batman, which is already in theaters right now as we speak, just as if this video is about to be uploaded. I won't, see it day one because I know it's going to be crowded as hell. So I'm going to take my time before going to see it, but I am pumped. And I will, get a review out as soon as possible. I hope you all have a lovely day. If it's your birthday, then happy birthday.